Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to the second season of my podcast series titled Finding My Way, a memoir by Jerry Morton. Season 2 continues with accounts of events and people I have experienced over the course of my life. The situations I remember and share with you have been important in shaping the way I interact with the world today. Season 2, Podcast 62, Searching for a New Life, is an account of the options I encountered as I prepared to become a civilian in the spring of 1969. My active duty Army obligation would end in June of that year. Since leaving graduate school in August 1966, my life experiences had caused me to want to explore the options that might be available for me in the civilian world. Podcast 62, Searching for a New Life. In the spring of 1969, I began preparing to enter civilian life. My time in the Army would be over in June of that year, unless the Army decided that I had a critical military occupation skill. The Army had a policy that once a soldier volunteered for special training, they could keep you in the Army or call you back at any time they declared they had a need of your skills. It seemed that only draftees, those forced into the Army for the standard 2 years of service, were the ones not subject to this policy. Anyway, I assumed that I would be allowed to leave the Army at the anticipated time. I obtained permission to take leave in March of 1969 to attend the Southeastern Psychological Association meeting in New Orleans. That group provided an opportunity for job seekers in the area of psychology to meet potential employers. The ones seeking a position paid a fee that allowed their resume to be posted in a collection of resumes that would be reviewed by potential employers. The applicant also received a list of available positions that were conducting interviews at the conference. An applicant or a potential employer could make the appropriate contact to make arrangements for an interview during the conference. I knew that I had the opportunity to return to Miami University of Ohio in Oxford, Ohio, to do a year's internship in school psychology. In order for a master's level school psychologist to get certified by the Ohio Department of Education, one had to have had an approved year-long internship in a school system. The school psychology department head had assured me that he would hold a position there for me when I was discharged from the Army. As I was signing up to enter the Army in August 1966, the sergeants had told me that I would complete my active service obligations in June 1969. However, I wanted to see if any doctoral programs in psychology might be interested in admitting me into their programs as a result of my activities at the Psychological Warfare School, Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The same might be true in the employment market. There were several positions advertised in the field of school psychology that looked interesting. However, being away from this field of study for 3 years in the Army gave me pause. I would have to relearn how to administer all of the individual intelligence tests and some of the other skills I had acquired back then. I felt somewhat intimidated by the catch-up work I would have to do. Reviewing the advertised positions at the conference was depressing. They all seemed so sophisticated. The only thing more depressing was the resumes of the applicants. They all reflected a high level of training and skills. I decided not to try to contact any of the potential employers. Completing the internship in Ohio was the only course that seemed open to me. To my surprise, 2 major university representatives contacted me about applying to their doctoral programs in psychology. The fields of psychology they represented were not in school psychology. However, their specialty areas in psychology did relate to some aspect of the work I was doing at the Psychological Warfare School. Both representatives interviewed me. They encouraged me to contact them once I returned to Fort Bragg. One of them even offered to allow me to stay in a spare bedroom at his house if I would come up for a weekend visit to be interviewed by other faculty members. Several school psychologists representing school systems from states that did not require an internship for certification contacted me for interviews with them. The PhD psychologist from Pinellas County, Florida, was particularly interested in my considering a position with him. The Pinellas County school system was a highly innovative system with a very diverse student population, he explained. The county included Tarpon Springs in the north, with St. Petersburg in the south, and Clearwater and Treasure Island in the middle. The interview ended with his promise to call me when I returned to Fort Bragg to discuss the position in greater detail. He had recently been employed by the school system to expand their school psychology department for the coming school year, so he could not state what specific schools I would be assigned to serve. It sounded interesting. The pay was in the upper end for a beginning master's level school psychologist. I explained my discomfort concerning my rusty skills. He assured me that he would mentor me if I joined his staff. A national insurance company representative also interviewed me and offered me a position during the interview. I would be employed as a trainee in the beginning before becoming a fully operational insurance agent. That didn't interest me, but the money sure was better than working as a beginning school psychologist. Then there was the major corporate representative. This guy called me in the late afternoon. He represented an international corporation and wanted to interview me for a position the corporate headquarters was creating. He offered to take me to dinner where we could talk about issues in a more relaxed atmosphere. The restaurant he took me to was a very upscale establishment. He was easy to talk with and had a sense of humor that matched mine. I told him a few of the funnier stories from the year of Army training. He really liked the ones about the chemical warfare school and the chipmunk. Before we realized it, most of the evening had passed. He wanted to keep interviewing me, he said, and suggested that he take me out to a brunch in the morning. I agreed. Then he took me to supper again. The next day, my last day in New Orleans, he offered to take me sightseeing, as he knew the city extremely well. He paid for everything. At the end of the day, he said that he wanted me to meet the corporate's vice president at their international headquarters in Houston, Texas. He would work to set up the meeting if I would be willing to meet with him and some other division vice presidents. I said that I would be willing to do that, but I was not sure I was the right person for what they were looking for. I still wasn't certain what the corporation was looking for. The position would be with a group of people they were pulling together to work on developing plans. The group would be directly accountable to both the corporation's president and vice president. When I returned to Fort Bragg, my wife and I discussed the situation. My undergraduate grades were not stellar, nor were my national test scores. Graduate school courses seemed easier than my undergraduate ones. My undergraduate school had done a good job in preparing me for graduate work, although I did not understand that to be the case at the time. Part of my duties as a graduate assistant was teaching the SQ3R study skills strategy to undergraduates. This caused me to learn how to be a highly efficient learner. That helped a lot. I had to admit, I also had a much higher motivational level to do well in graduate school as compared to my undergraduate days. I was a married graduate student. My wife was working a demanding job to help get me through school. She was a high school English teacher. Between the two of us, she was the outstanding academic scholar. If I did not do superior work, I needed to quit. I did superior work. Long hours and rigorously applying the SQ3R study skills did the job. Still, I was doubtful that the two major universities that interviewed me would consider me once they knew of my undergraduate grades and test scores. The university professor that offered to let me sleep in his spare bedroom actually called me at home. I explained about my grades and test scores. He said they were fine. He wanted to sponsor me as his graduate student. In order for him to do that, I needed to come to the university and meet the chair of the psychology department and other faculty members. After conferring with my wife, I agreed to go. This was a long shot. However, my long-term dream was to get a doctorate in psychology. This might be my one and only chance. If only I had known about the SQ3R study skills process and been more motivated in undergraduate school. Oh well. The trip would strain our budget. I couldn't make any other expensive trips after this one. I flew into Boston and took mass transportation to the campus. The professor had made arrangements for one of his graduate students to pick me up that Friday afternoon. The graduate student was about my age and talkative. As we were driving to the professor's home, the student said that he and a fellow grad student would be escorting me to all my meetings Saturday and Sunday morning. My plane left Sunday afternoon. The guy and his friend had made arrangements for me to attend a concert on campus and a jazz band later that night. Saturday night we would all go to an apartment for a great party. He thought that would be a lot of fun. I wasn't so sure, but then what did I know? The concert was an experience. First of all, I didn't look like all the graduate school students. The civilian clothing I wore served as a poor disguise. My military haircut, my military physical conditioning, and my general military bearing that had been so carefully built into me by that year of training. The highly intense nature of the Special Warfare Center and all of the senior officers I had worked with clearly set me apart from those in the university setting. I was not prepared for what the concert experience presented. My first inkling that the concert experience was going to be off-center came when my escort explained that we would not have to pay for tickets to the university's concert. He had a friend that worked on the stage crew. His friend would leave the back door to the concert hall ajar so that we could slip in. Sure enough, when it came time to enter the concert hall, the back door was open. Wearing the same clothes we had been in all afternoon, we walked into the university concert hall. It was huge. I was confronted with rows and rows of seats that were packed with people, all dressed in fine style. The men all seemed to be in coats and ties, with the women in very upscale gowns and dresses. Most of the people I observed as we walked from the stage area to the seats facing the stage were mature adults, with many of them having to be university professors and their spouses. I noticed out of the corner of my eye how formally dressed the concert orchestra members were as we passed them on the stage. The auditorium seats were almost completely full. This was a first-class event, and my two conspirators and I were calmly walking up the center aisle in our wrinkled street clothes. So much for being one of the crowd. My leader pointed to 3 open seats in the center of the concert hall. He calmly led the 2 of us past all of the seated patrons in the row to get to the 3 seats that had been apparently reserved for us. I just wanted to sink down into my chair and slide to the floor as close as possible. Surely one of the faculty members who would be interviewing me the next day was in this audience. No telling what kind of impression I was making. The lights dimmed and the conductor was introduced. After vigorous applause, the audience achieved complete silence. The concert began with a soft flow of gentle music, and my guide lit up a marijuana cigarette. It must have been a particularly good one, for the odor was strong and unmistakable. The cigarette was held up in an offer to me. I shook my head no. My other guide gladly accepted it. Expecting the surrounding audience to react with shock, anger, and a call for the police, I prepared to escape. I would jump over the first 3 seats and then rush for the rear exit door. I could not be arrested for drug use in this place. I could not be a front-page news item. I was military. I came from a highly secure military base. The Army would court-martial me. I would be in a military prison for a long time. I could not be arrested. The audience did nothing. They pretended that nothing was going on. The 2 guys did not even get a sideward glance from the nearest audience members. I was amazed. I did not understand what was going on. After the concert, we went to this campus jazz place. Loud noise and laughter filled the air. Beer was plentiful. I was bored and tired. They took me to the professor's house. I went down to the basement apartment and slept. In the morning, I met the dean of the Liberal Arts College and the chairman of the psychology department. They explained the graduate program to me and asked me a few questions. The chairman was pleased to know of my interest in child psychology. He talked a lot about a well-known child psychologist whose work I had studied at Miami of Ohio. My responses appeared to be supportive of the department head's comments. That evening, my two guides took me to some apartment building's apartment on the second floor. Entering it was a surprise. All of the furniture had been pushed against the wall of a rather large living room of some sort. It was packed full of young men and women of my approximate age. Some of them were leaning against walls or furniture, but most of them were seated on the floor. The lighting was dim and the air was cloudy with cigarette smoke. Another room was off to the left. It was a little smaller than the living room. It was full of people as well. I talked with a few of them. They liked being university students. After a while, most of the attendees had collected in a big circle sitting on the living room floor, talking quietly to each other. The girl on my left tapped my arm and asked, "So, I hear you live in North Carolina." "Yes, I do right now. I've lived in a lot of different places." "What are the marijuana laws in North Carolina?" I don't know what you mean." "Well, in this state, if you've been arrested for marijuana possession, you can't get licensed as a teacher. I've gotten 2 possession arrests on my record in this state. I graduate the end of this term in education. Can I get a license in North Carolina?" "Gosh, I'm sorry. I just don't know what North Carolina's laws are about that." Just then, the guy on my left taps my arm. I turn my head to see he has offered me a very short, soggy end of a marijuana cigarette, a stub. Clearly, many, many wet mouths have been on the end he is holding for me to take. I take it. God, I could never bring myself to put my mouth to that dripping wet collection of human spit. Quickly passing it to the teacher-to-be, I watched her take a drag and pass it on. Turning back to me, she says, "You have to be careful at parties like these. Last weekend, the apartment across the hall was raided by the police for having a marijuana party." I agreed and excused myself. Walking around the room, I made contingency plans for escaping this place if the police busted in. I could not be arrested. I would have to show my military ID. The headlines would read, "Active Duty Army Officer from Special Warfare Center's Psychological Warfare School arrested for possession. What does the Army's clandestine presence mean?" God, I was not going to be arrested. There weren't many avenues of escape. I located a fire escape out a window in the back room. That would be my most logical exit, unless the police had a man at the bottom of it. Escape would depend on how many police officers there were and how they were deployed. If worse came to worse, I would jump out the second-story window at the back right side of the room. The landing would be on wet soil. With luck, the police would not expect an escape from that location and height. I had jumped about that far before without getting hurt. Maybe I could do it again. I was not going to be arrested. Sunday morning, 2 graduate students that I had met but not interacted with much the day before saw me walking across campus from one of my interviews and called me out. As we met, one of them said, "Do you know what's going on here?" No, what do you mean?" "Has anyone told you your professor is not going to be here next year?" "No, no one said anything about that. Where's he going?" "We don't know." "Well, why then is he leaving?" "He's been fired by the dean. Fired? Why? For being an open communist. He was on a local radio talk show and he said he was a communist. The dean has fired him as of the end of this semester. Oh, I had no idea. Thank you. Well, if this isn't a nice mess. Here I am in a very classified Army center running around with a bunch of potheads and unknown communists. How do I get myself into these kinds of situations? The professor drove me to the bus station and encouraged me to get back with him. He wanted me in his program, he said. When I got back to the fort and told Anna the story, we agreed that I was not applying to that program. I wrote the professor a nice letter thanking him for hosting my visit, but I did not think that the university psychology program was for me. The program seemed to be focused on this one famous child psychologist's theories about children, which I thought were very important, even though I did not want to pursue them in my future graduate studies. About 3 weeks later, I received a long letter from the head of the university psychology department. The department chairman wanted me to understand that many areas of child psychology were taught in depth in the psychology department. He strongly encouraged me to apply to the program. I sent him a thank you letter, but stated that I had other opportunities I was pursuing. At the time of the letter writing, other opportunities were a meaningful possibility.